Hello my friends and welcome back. Thank you very much for being with me again today. Well, a lot of fighting occurs in Ukraine, and we have an update here from the Ukrainians where they tell us how fantastic they are. This article comes from Ukrainska Pravda from November 9th, 2022. This is the title: Ukrainian armed forces strike 14 clusters of Russian military personnel. General Staff report. Now this is going to be an update with all the fronts where the Ukrainians tell us, hey, on these fronts this is what they did, this is what we did, and so on. So, over the course of the past 24 hours, the armed forces of Ukraine have repelled Russian attacks in Luhansk and Donetsk Oblast and have carried out 14 strikes, including airstrikes on clusters of Russian military personnel. So if you repel something, that means that comes towards you. So yeah, if you repel them, that means they are trying to conduct an offensive. I didn't hear the Ukrainians doing that yet, but I think they are somewhere, right? The source comes from, the source is the General Staff of Armed Forces of Ukraine. And details: the Ukrainian armed forces have repelled Russian attacks in the vicinity of Bilohorivka and Novoselivke in Luhansk Oblast and Bakhmut. Well, I told you they are fighting in Bakhmut, Advivka and Novopavlinka. Now all these were in Donetsk Oblast. Over the course of the past 24 hours, Russian forces carried out 7 missile strikes and 32 airstrikes, as well as over 70 attacks using multiple launch rocket systems, MLRS. More than 35 Ukrainian cities, towns and villages in Sumy, Kharkiv, Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporozhye, Kherson and Mykolaiv Oblasts came under Russian fire. There were no significant changes on the Volyn and Polisia fronts. The Republic of Belarus is continuing to aid and support Russia's military aggression against Ukraine by allowing Russian forces to use its territory, airspace and infrastructure. Belarus and Russia are continuing to form a joint military unit. Preliminary information from the General Staff suggests that military personnel from the 38th Separate Guards Air Assault Brigade of the Armed Forces of the Republic of Belarus purchased up to 100 first aid kits oh man, and other tactical load bearing vests and other equipment for the personnel, blah blah blah. Really? So they're getting ready for something? I don't think the Belarusians will do anything. They just provide, as the Ukrainians said, land, facilities and air. Units of attack drone operators are being formed as part of the Belarusian border forces. On other fronts, the Russians continued to fire on military and civilian targets. Well, lately the Ukrainians are mentioning military targets. Maybe if out of 20 articles that I read regarding this kind of changes on the front, 19 mention only civilian targets. 1 out of 20 mentions sometimes the military targets. But now this is the second time when I find this in about 2 days, when the Ukrainian outlet mentions military targets and civilian targets hit by the Russians. On the Shivenya front, Russian forces deployed 2 artillery to fire in the vicinity of Popivka, Sumy Oblast. On the Slabohashchinya front, Russian forces deployed tank, guns and artillery of various calibers to fire. Alright, now, this is in Kharkiv Oblast. When the Ukrainians say that the Russians use tanks, imagine that that's a movement of forces, usually any offensive. You're gonna see that there are certain ones where they don't mention tanks, and if you read other articles, you're going to figure out that wherever these guys mention the word tanks involved, usually that's an offensive. But you have to read more than one article to figure that out. On the Kupiansk and Liman fronts, Russian forces deployed various types of artillery to fire on areas in and around, and they gave us here Kharkiv Oblast, Luhansk Oblast, and Donetsk Oblast. On the Bakhmut front, now here must be some tanks. Yeah, here it is. The Russians deployed tank guns, mortars, and tubed and rocket artillery to fire on areas in and around. It gives you Advivka, yeah, it's an offensive. Bakhmut, that's an offensive. And all those, and about 7 more little towns here. Or I don't know if they're little or not little, but they don't sound familiar. In the Donetsk Oblast. On the Avdiivka front, the Russians deployed again tanks and all types of artillery at their disposal to fire on areas in the vicinity of Avdiivka, Vodiane, Marianka, and that's in and here we have Novomyakailivka. Oh my God! All this in Donetsk Oblast. On the Novopavlivka front, the Russians fired, no tanks here, they mentioned that yesterday or the day before, fired on areas in and around Velika, Novosilka, and all these are in Donetsk Oblast, using, oh my God, using tank, guns, mortars and tubes and rocket artillery. Yes, so at the end they said yes, using tanks, guns, but don't just fire, you have them to move around. On the Zaporozhye front, Russian forces deployed artillery of various calibers to fire on areas in Zaporozhye Oblast. It says here vicinity of Karivne and Stepove. No tanks. On the Pivdeny Bukh front, more than 30 cities, towns and villages situated along the line of contact came under Russian fire. The Russians carried out airstrikes in the vicinity of Nova Kamyanka and Bilohirka in the Kherson Oblast. The General Staff has confirmed that several Russian units have been struck in the temporarily occupied territories of Zaporozhye Oblast. In addition, 15 pieces of Russian military equipment were destroyed and up to 150 Russian soldiers were killed or injured on 6th of November. We are on the 9th, buddy. Over the past 24 hours, Ukrainian aircraft carried out 18 airstrikes on Russian forces, striking 4 platoon strong points, 10 clusters of military personnel, weapons and equipment, and 4 anti-aircraft defense systems. Ukrainian defense forces shot down 5 Lancet UAVs and 4 Orlan 10 UAVs across several fronts. Ukraine's rocket forces and artillery struck 1 Russian command post and 4 clusters of Russian military personnel, weapons and equipment. So that would conclude this guys' update for that area, which is the whole front. Again, we have 3 areas where the Ukrainians are repelling the Russians, and there's Bakhmut, Advivka and Novopavlivka. These are the 3 ones that are continuous or consistent with showing tanks, and sometimes they say that they try to conduct offensive operations in those 3 my God, I'm dying here on 3 areas, 3 axes. Thank you very much for being with me again today. Stay strong, stay smart, look for the truth and be just.